Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. I have missed you. It's great to be back with you after we had a 3-day Hag, Shabbos, and then the first 2 days of the Passover festival. 3 days without an AT daily. Oh my gosh, it's too long. How are you? Let's light up the darkness. Where are we? This is Hol HaMoed. We're in the intermediate days of Pesach. We counted tonight the second day of the Omer, the 7 weeks that we will count between the second night of Passover and then the 50th day will be Shavuos. And this is a time of refinement, an absolute time when our souls are kind of aching for the Creator and we're kind of to rise a little bit higher. And the way we can do that is to refine ourselves, right? To refine ourselves, this act of personal refinement. It's actually something I spoke about on the first day of, was it on Passover? No, I think I spoke it on Shabbos, which was Shabbos Hagadol. And we read there, the Haftorah that we read on Shabbos is from the prophet Malachi. And the end of the book of Malachi is that the prophet Elijah will come and herald the day of the awesome day of the Lord, right? In other words, the Messianic age will be heralded by the prophet Elijah when he comes back. But what the prophet Malachi says about that is that Elijah will come and he will turn the hearts of the sons to their fathers and the hearts of the fathers to their sons, or I, the Lord, will smite the land with utter destruction. And so there's this sense that the Messianic age will come one of 2 days. Either we will refine ourselves and refine our world and make this world a fitting place for God, or God will have to come down and set it up. If by the first, it's a kind of a process of evolution, right? We will elevate this world until it's a fitting place for God. And if we can't do that, then it'll be a kind of a revolution instead of evolution. And that's where you hear about apocalypse and the apocalyptic and, all those difficult times, the birth pangs of Mashiach, as it were. And this idea that, there's a tradition that says that before the Messianic age will come, there will be some terrible times, the wars of Og and Magog, etc. Much better that we should elevate the world than that the world should need that kind of a shaking out and cleansing, as it were. And what's interesting is that the prophet Malachi tells us that what we need to do to elevate the world is what? End poverty, end hunger, end war? No. Turn the hearts of the older generation to the younger generation and the younger generation to the older generation. In other words, that we should act like human beings, like kind, respectful, decent human beings. Listen to the wisdom of our elders, and the elders should not think of the youth as naive and misguided, but that there should be some real communication and kindness among the people of the world. And that's how we refine the world, and that is how we refine ourselves. So what I spoke about on Saturday at our minyan is so this idea, okay, so we could bring perhaps the Messianic age, which we could stimulate heaven and Mashiach would come to us sooner. But is it a commandment? Are we commanded to refine our character? That was the question that I asked, and it's an interesting question. I asked a great rabbi here in LA, a Dayan, one who's known for really knowing the laws inside and out, Rabbi Tauber. And he agrees with the Rambam, with Maimonides, that yes, it is a commandment to refine one's character. And what is the source for that? You shall walk in all his ways. God is kind, we should be kind. God is patient, we should be patient. God is slow to anger, we should be slow to anger. We should cultivate and develop in ourselves those fine positive attributes of the Lord. And so that's the commandment, to refine our character. Rav Chaim Vital, who lived about 500 years ago, a great Jewish mystic and the one responsible for sort of putting into print the teachings of the holy Ari, the Arizal, in Sfat, the Jewish mystical community in northern Israel, in the city of Sfat. So Rav Chaim Vital said, no, it is not a commandment in the Torah that we refine our character. And the reason that the Torah does not specifically command us to refine our character is because in order to fulfill all the 613 commandments, which oblige the Jewish people, one must refine our character, right? It's necessary in order to properly fulfill all the other commandments that we elevate and refine ourselves and become more decent, refined human beings. And that as we just do the mitzvahs, that will have, it's kind of nice feedback effect that the more we, fulfill our obligations as laid out in the Torah, the more refined we'll be. And the more refined we'll be, the better we'll be at fulfilling our obligations in the Torah. And then I suggested one more source in the very first commandment that God gave the universe. The first commandment that God put into the world is Peru Urevu. You shall be fruitful and multiply. Some of you have heard me speak about this before. Most people take Peru Urevu, you shall be fruitful and multiply, as you need to reproduce, right? You need to populate the world. You need to try to have children. This idea of just multiplying. But if all it meant was you need to reproduce and populate the world and make sure that the next generation survives and that there's a world for them, then it would have been enough to say you shall multiply. Be fruitful and multiply indicates that we need to bear fruit. How do humans bear fruit? I mean, you look at an apple tree, okay, it's having apples, it's bearing fruit. An orange tree is making oranges. The animals do what they do. What do humans do? In other words, to bear fruit is to do the most beautiful thing that you can. In other words, right, as I always tell us, as I always say in this community, you don't have a soul. You are a soul. You are a soul. You are a being who made of light. You come from the world of souls. You agreed, right? You and God came to an agreement that you would come into this world. Part of that deal, very tough part of the deal, is amnesia. You would ride around in a human body and not remember who you really are, a being made of light who came here with a mission. But because you came here with a mission, that mission would always be there. And if you keep asking and looking and seeking to figure out what your mission is, you can gradually remember who you really are. And so when you do that which you came to do and which only you can do, then you're bearing fruit in this world. An artist makes art, a businessman creates businesses that help other people. It's going to be some version of helping other people, of bestowing kindness upon others, of making our Father in heaven proud that we came here in the same way that children can make their parents proud. That's bearing fruit. And the process of refining our character, of course, it's necessary in order to bear fruit in this world. So the very first commandment, to bear fruit in this world, requires character refinement. And if we would do that and think about it, then we could bring the Messianic age sooner. And this is a very propitious time to be thinking about that as we come out of the first days of Passover. And now we're counting the Omer. We literally count the days every night where we say a blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to count the Omer, and then we count the days. And so earlier tonight we counted. This is the second day of the counting of the Omer. And we work our way up to the 50th day, and then Shavuos comes, the revelation at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given into the world. And each of these days we reflect on our inner attributes, the Sephiros as they're called, Chesed, loving kindness, Gevura, judgment, Tiferet, harmony or beauty between kindness and judgment, Netzach is a kind of endurance and victory. Hod, which is a type of splendor. Yesod, which is a kind of foundation that we're trying to create in ourselves. And Malchus, which is the sovereignty of the Lord that draws us up. But these are also emotional attributes within us. And like Rabbi Tauber and Maimonides say, we try to emulate God's attributes and build them up in ourselves, and that refines our character. And as we change ourselves, as we improve ourselves, as we become more refined souls in this more refined humans in this world, so we refine the world itself. All right, I just wanted to share that with you. Who's with us tonight? Who is with us tonight? Let me welcome Paula in Chicago, Patrice in Utah, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, John in Sedona, Paul in Minneapolis, Sandy saying good evening, everyone. Paula is here. Melissa in Great Neck, Walt in Tacoma, Washington, Belle in Shelbyville, home of the Simpsons enemies. Bill wishing us a hearty shalom from Berkeley and hope everyone had a magnificent Passover. Ann in Merced, Michelle wishing shalom blessings, Lindsay in Cincinnati, Miriam in Colorado, Deborah in Tennessee, Erin in La Mirada, Brooke says shalom, Ari, be kind to each other, Bill, but if we were to turn our hearts in that way, how far that would go to destroying the powers of poverty and war. Exactly. Right? There was another saying, when I was young, I thought to change the world, and then I realized I couldn't. As I got older, I thought maybe if I could just change my nation, and then I realized I couldn't. Then I thought maybe if I could change my city, and I realized I couldn't. And finally, when I was older and wiser, I realized maybe I could just change myself. And if I would have started by changing myself, maybe I could have changed my community, maybe I could have changed the city, maybe I could have changed my nation, maybe I could have changed the world. All change in this world starts with one's self. Julie says shalom, my friends. Debbie in New Jersey. Liaquat in Pakistan. Welcome. Emma says shalom. Jan wishing us a Hag Sameach. Heather says shalom. Josette, shalom from Colorado. Julie, our thoughts become words, and our words become action, and our actions become habit, and habits our character, and our character becomes our destiny. Very well put, Julie. Leah says shalom from Miami, and Carlos, feliz noche. A good night to you. Over there on the YouTube side, Gigi in British Columbia, and Marjorie in Georgia. Where are we holding? This is Tractate Shekalim, the 5th volume of the Talmud. And these are the laws of the collection of shekels that were made every year that were like a tax, but not a tax, right? But all of the adult Jewish males in ancient Israel, when the temple was standing, and it was destroyed 2,000 years ago, but when the temple was standing, once a year, everyone had to contribute a half shekel, and this collection would be used to fund the daily offerings, the daily communal offerings, and the additional offerings of Shabbos and festivals that were brought on behalf of the whole nation. That's generally what these laws are all about. We're in chapter 2 on page 7, Daf Zion. And what are we talking about here? This is the 5th halacha in chapter 2. And generally what we're talking about right now is, well, when they make collection, what about the leftover shekels? What about money that was collected and it was more than what was necessary for those daily offerings? What would they do with it? We actually talked about that on the previous daf on Friday. And now in this 5th halacha, we're going to sort of do a related teaching, very, very practical type of teaching. When money is collected for righteous causes, for charity, and more is collected than is necessary for the given action that was collected for. For instance, there was a person died and had no family to take care of his funeral expenses, and so the community contributes so that the person can have a dignified burial. And let's say the community donated more than was needed. So then what do you do with that extra money? That's what this law is about. And then we're going to make a fascinating digression into some of, into very interesting personalities of the sages. And what they were like, a little bit about their character, and this idea that it was very important to the sages that their teachings, that their words of Torah would be transmitted in their name, and why, as we shall see. All right, let's get into it. Page 7, halacha number 5 here in chapter 2. The leftover money collected for freeing unspecified captives must be allocated to freeing captives, right? This is a big mitzvah in the Torah, redeeming the captives. So if a Jew was kidnapped by some, enemy force, could be local, could be national, could be foreign, any kind of enemy force that took our people, we have to do everything that we can do to get our, fellow Jew out of that prison, out of that captivity. And often that required ransoming them, right? They were kidnapped and we had to get them back. So leftover money from redeeming the captive, what would it be used for? Redeeming other captives. The leftover money collected as charity for the poor must be allocated to the poor. The leftover money collected for a specific poor person is given as a gift to that poor person. The leftover money collected for burying the dead must be allocated to burying the dead. The leftover money collected to bury or provide burial shrouds for a particular deceased person is given to his heirs. Rabbi Meir says it is uncertain what should be done, and therefore the leftover money for the deceased should be placed in a safe until Elijah comes, the prophet Eliyahu, and teaches what should be done. Rabbi Nassan says, with leftover money collected for a deceased person, they build a monument on his grave for him. So we see a couple of different opinions here, 3 different opinions on what to do when a particular person dies and there wasn't, the family didn't have enough money to bury him properly. They took up a collection in the community and there was more than was needed to bury him. You could give the money to the heirs. You could set aside the money, to bury other people. Actually, that's no one's opinion. That's only if money was given generally to bury people. But for a specific person, you either give it to the heirs or you use it to build a monument over the grave of that person, like a bigger monument, let's say. Or it's unclear what should be done, according to Rabbi Meir, and you put that money aside because we just don't know what to do with it. We can't give it to anybody because it wasn't collected for that purpose. It was collected for this dead person, but there's more than was needed, and we're not sure what to do. And so there are certain situations where when we're not sure what to do, the sages will say, when Elijah comes, he will tell us what to do. Meaning, when the Messiah comes, and the knowledge of God fills the world like the waters fill the sea, then many unanswered questions will be answered. And perhaps they'll be even answered sooner than that. Elijah is understood to mean that we will await a revelation from heaven because we can't figure it out ourselves. Why Elijah? Because the prophet Elijah didn't die. Elijah ascended in a fiery chariot. He was taken away, and because he never actually died, there's many stories in the Talmud where Elijah will come back and occasionally reveal a little bit of what's going on in heaven or bring a message that God wanted delivered, etc. And so we kind of rely on Elijah to resolve some of these unanswerable questions, according to Rabbi Meir's opinion in this situation. Now the Gemara on this Mishnah. With regard to a case where the community collected money to finance the expenses of burying a deceased person, with the presumption that he did not have the money in his estate to cover these expenses, and it was subsequently found that he had money, Rabbi Yirmiyah thought to say that the halacha, the law, should be in accordance with the first Tana in our Mishnah, in our Mishnah, and that the leftover money for a deceased person is given as a gift to his heirs. There is no difference whether only a portion of the money was needed and a portion was left, or whether there was no need at all for the money and all of it now remains. The people did it to sort of honor this person because they cared about this person who seemingly there wasn't going to be enough money to bury him. Now it turns out that there was, or there was enough, at least some money to bury him, and either some of the collection was needed or none of the collection was needed. So that person would have wanted that the money goes to their heirs. So that's what we do. That's according to this opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Edi of Hutra said to him, "Bring yourself to consider the matter, and you will see that the two cases are not similar, as surely the people intended to contribute their money only for him, for the deceased. They do not mind if the heirs receive any extra money, as it is difficult to collect precisely the right amount for the burial. However, had they known that their money would not be used for the burial at all, and that the entire amount would be given to the heirs, they presumably would not have initially agreed to contribute. Rabbi Yirmiyah said in response to Rabbi Edi of Chutra, I didn't say that this was the definitive halacha, as I merely suggested what I think should be done. However, from where do you derive the distinction that you are making? The Gemara leaves the issue unresolved. And do we have a halacha here? A halacha, and the Gemara leaves it unresolved. We don't have a halacha yet on when too much money was collected for burying a person, what we do with it. So the Gemara leaves that unresolved and continues. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Nassan. With the leftover money that was collected for burying a deceased person, a monument is built on his grave, and wine is brought for spraying over his bier. I think that's how you pronounce it, his bier, like the funeral procession, the bier where he's going to be eulogized during the funeral, to make a pleasant odor at that event. And the Mishnah teaches that the leftover money, and now we're going to move on to the captive. So this idea of Rabbi Nassan is, okay, you don't give it to the heirs, it was meant for him, and it's kind of unlimited, right? There's always going to be a bigger monument that you could build, and in this way, all of the money will go to the burial. No matter how much was collected, it can be invested in what the people thought it would be for, the burial. They just build a bigger monument. The Mishnah teaches that the leftover money for freeing a specific captive or for the support of a particular poor person is given to that person. And similarly, it was taught in a Baraisa, one may not redeem a captive with money that was collected for another captive. And similarly, one may not purchase a garment for one poor person with charity collected to purchase a garment for a different poor person. Nonetheless, one does not protest against the leaders of the community about this if they choose to do this practice in exigent circumstances. Now I'll go back to the halacha that's stated here opposite the Mishnah. Surplus funds, this is the law, surplus funds collected for a specific person are allocated to that person. If money was collected to supply the basic needs of a particular poor person and more than was necessary was collected, the leftover amount belongs to him. If money was collected to free a particular captive, any leftover funds are given to the captive. If money was collected from the public for a particular deceased person, the surplus belongs to his heirs. Okay, so that's where the law came out, in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana. In contrast, money that was collected for a specific cause but not for a particular person must remain dedicated to that cause. Leftover funds collected as charity are designated as charity and may not be used for anything but supplying the needs of the poor. If money was collected to free unspecified captives, the leftover funds may be used to free captives and for no other purpose. Funds collected to see to the needs of unspecified deceased people may be used only for that purpose in accordance with the Mishnah. And I can tell you, since we run a nonprofit, that this is American tax law as well, an American nonprofit law. I guess it's actually administered by the states. You become a federal nonprofit, but then, the state that you're in also administers the law of the nonprofits. But there's a general principle that if somebody donates to your nonprofit for a specific purpose that your nonprofit should use that money for, you can only use it for that particular purpose that they made the donation for. That's why it's generally considered better when donating to an organization to just donate to the organization and don't specify, because you sort of box their hands a little bit. Let's continue, and let me make that do not disturb. Okay. After discussing building a monument for a deceased person, the Gemara adds that it was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, one does not construct monuments for the graves of righteous people. It's like, what? For sure, we know there are monuments for righteous people. The Lubavitcher Rebbe has the Ohel, right, a monument over his grave over there in the cemetery in Queens, where he was laid to rest, also where my father-in-law laid to rest. And you can visit the graves of tzaddikim in Israel, in Uman, in Breslov, in Berdichev, in Medjugorje, in Ukraine. Many Hasidic masters where they are buried. There's definitely a monument over their grave. And yet here we find this teaching from Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel that we don't construct a monument on the grave of a righteous person. In this case, meaning a great Torah light, a great Torah luminary. So this law obviously changed over the centuries. But it's so beautiful the reason that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel gives. One does not construct monuments for the graves of righteous people. Why? Because the purpose of a monument is to remember the dead person. And Torah scholars do not need a monument as their words are their memorial. Now that's actually something to aspire to for all of us, right? That we should say and even do such good kindness and be of such service to the people around us, right? That it's our words and our deeds that will be remembered after us. Because truthfully, even if you get a nice monument on your grave, how many people visit your grave? It's the words that they give over in your name and the deeds that you've done that are remembered, that are really the monument of a person. And the more of a righteous person you are in this world, perhaps the more of these words and deeds will be remembered. Now, why did this law change? For two main reasons. One is that people like to visit the graves of very famous righteous leaders, leaders of the generation, people that they were really inspired by the words and teachings of these tzaddikim, of these righteous people, and they want to visit the graves, and they want to pray at those graves. You don't pray to the tzaddik. You don't pray to the righteous person, God forbid. We only pray to God. However, by praying by the graveside of a righteous person, we can do two things. We can sort of ask the soul of that righteous person to assist us in making our prayers be heard in heaven. That's one of it. Let me read the note here. When Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said one should not erect monuments for the righteous, he was referring only to possible benefits for the deceased. Since the righteous are not forgotten after their death, as their words perpetuate their memory, and they also do not need atonement, they have no need for a grave monument. However, another function of building grave monuments for righteous people is so that the living may know where a righteous person is buried and may pray there on their own behalf. Right, so you can pray on your own behalf by the graves of the righteous. Cited in the response in Ketav Sofer is the speech of the author derived when the building erected over the tomb of his father, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, was completed. In the speech he asked, I think this is Rav Steinsaltz's father, why is it appropriate to spend large sums of money? I don't know who the author is. No, it's the author of this book that was written by a rabbi. And he had a monument built for his father, right? And so because it says in the Gemara, you shouldn't build monuments for the righteous, and he didn't want people to think, God forbid, that his father is not righteous. Of course his father was righteous. So why did he build the monument? Why is it appropriate to spend large sums of money erecting such a structure? Doesn't this indicate that my father was not a righteous person and that his words will not serve as a memorial to him? And he answered that there is a dual purpose in building a grave monument. First, it is for the sake of the soul of the deceased who is buried there, so that people will not forget to pray for him and help improve his standing in the world to come. Right? When we say somebody of blessed memory, may his soul have a great elevation in the world to come, may his memory always be for a blessing, then it's like we're praying for that person. And when we give over teachings in his name, it actually assists that person, that soul in the world of souls, to actually go up a little higher in their progress toward, proximity to the throne of glory, as it were. And second, the monument is for the sake of those people who want to pray for themselves at the grave of a righteous person. The tombstone on the grave enables him to know where the place is of the righteous, and to sort of, bond his soul or connect his soul to the soul of the righteous person as the person is praying by the grave of the righteous person. Rabbi Yochanan was walking while leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, And Rabbi Eliezer was watching him and hiding from him. Rabbi Yochanan said, "This Babylonian has done two improper things to me. One, he didn't inquire about my welfare. And another, he is hiding from me as though he doesn't want to speak to me." Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi tried to placate Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, "This is the custom among them, among the Babylonians. The small, less prominent people do not inquire after the welfare of the great prominent people. They only respond to them." You actually see this, for instance, in the British Navy of 200 years ago, which I just, it's something I'm interested in. I read novels set in that world. And, the lieutenants and midshipmen could never speak to the captain without asking permission to speak. And at dinner, especially the midshipmen, they wouldn't speak unless spoken to. Not because they don't revere the captain, they respect him enormously, but it's their custom in that service that the great prominent person has to speak first. Here what we have is a difference in the etiquette of Babylonia versus the etiquette in the land of Israel in these Talmudic times, that in Babylonia, the disciples wouldn't address their teachers until they had been spoken to. But in Israel, it was considered polite for the students to inquire of the welfare of their teachers. "How are you today?" Since there was a difference, you could have this kind of, mistaken understanding where you think they're being rude by not asking how you're doing today, where they're trying to be polite by not speaking first. And that's what they were trying to explain to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi tried to placate Rabbi Yochanan and said, "This is the custom among them. The small do not inquire after the welfare of the great. Their custom is to fulfill that which is written in the verse, 'The young men saw me and hid themselves, and the aged rose up and stood,'" a verse from Job 29:8. When Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi saw that Rabbi Yochanan was not mollified, he said to him, "What is the halacha, the law, with regard to passing in front of the Adura statue? Does that fall into the category of giving honor to idolatry?" And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "What honor are you giving it by merely passing in front of it? You could pass in front of it and blind its eyes," meaning that you could pass in front of it and insult it. Right? So so he's asking, well, wait a minute. When you pass in front of a statue of idolatry, is it okay to just walk past it? Or since it's a statue of Avodah Zarah, an idol, should you in some way, indicate your distaste for it? And like insult it somehow, that there's, that there are these statues that people worship and we have nothing but disgust for idolatry. It's like one of the biggest sins there is, on the level with murder and rape, according to the Torah. So you could pass in front of it and blind its eyes, meaning that you could pass in front of it and insult it. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said to him, "If so, Rabbi Eliezer was right not to pass in front of you, since if he had passed in front of you, but maintained the custom of the Babylonians not to inquire after your welfare, it would have been a slight to your honor." Right? So Rabbi Eliezer was actually trying to, sort of fulfill the law as he had learned it in Babylonia, that you don't talk to the elders before they talk to you. But he knew that Rabbi Yochanan had a different custom. And so rather than walk by him and not address him first, he thought, maybe I'll just, not pass by him, not avoid him, so that I don't get into that difficult situation. So Rabbi Yochanan continued, well, the Babylonian did something else wrong, in that he did not say a law in my name, as he repeated without attribution something I taught him. So now we dig a little deeper, and it's like, okay, Rabbi Yochanan already had a little bit of a problem with this particular Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi entered. In order to appease Rabbi Yochanan, they said to him, "Rabbi, there was an incident that occurred in the synagogue of the weavers." So sometimes you had synagogues that were built by a particular profession, just like you also have synagogues built, in Los Angeles, for example, by the Syrian community or the Persian community or the Iraqi community, or a New York community. It's like people that came from a similar place might build a synagogue together. In old times, you would often have synagogues built by people who share a profession. So there was an incident that came up in the synagogue of the weavers, where they were discussing the halakhic status of a door bolt, a vertical bar that is affixed to the door in order to push it into the ground, which has a knob protruding at its top. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yosef disagreed about this issue until it reached a point that they tore up a Torah scroll in their anger. Before the Gemara resumes the story, it asks, could it enter your mind that Torah sages tore up a Torah scroll? Rather, it means that each of them pulled in his own direction, and accidentally the Torah scroll was torn. But the Gemara returns to the story told by Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. And there was a certain old man, one of the sages, named Rabbi Yosef ben Kizma, and he said, I will be surprised if this synagogue does not become a house of idolatry, since the sages say that whoever is angry should be in your eyes like an idolater. In other words, what these rabbis are saying to Rabbi Yochanan, you're carrying a grudge against this particular Rabbi Eliezer. It doesn't suit you. It's beneath you. It's not worth it. Don't carry anger around. And then to try to, give a source for their story, why it's so important to avoid anger, they tell this story about there was this particular synagogue and they were arguing about a matter of Torah law, and the argument became so heated, and they were trying to point to a verse in the Torah to prove their point, and they were both pulling at the Torah at the same time, that they ended up ripping the Torah scroll in their anger, in their passion. I'm sure they were both shocked and ashamed and appalled by what had happened. But somebody who was watching this, or hearing about it, I think he was there, Yosef ben Kizma, he saw it, he saw these people arguing, and then, they tore a Torah scroll in their anger, and he said, I would be surprised if this synagogue does not become a house of idolatry. Meaning, so much anger took place between people who are supposed to be Torah sages in this building that it's like they're already leaning toward idolatry, and perhaps this synagogue will even become a house of idolatry. It's a bit of hyperbole, but meant to teach us that people who are so wedded to their righteous anger are actually leaning away from faith in the Holy One and toward idolatry, because they worship their own feelings more than a good character as demanded from us by God. The Gemara relates that although Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi thought that Rabbi Yochanan would be appeased after hearing their story, disparaging anger between Torah scholars, Rabbi Yochanan responded and said, this is an incident between colleagues. How can you compare that to my situation, as Rabbi Eliezer is my disciple? Okay, so these people should not have become so angry. But Rabbi Yochanan is saying, I'm angry at my student because he hasn't treated me with respect. That anger I'm entitled to, says Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi entered before Rabbi Yochanan and said to him that it is written, as God commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone from all that God had commanded Moses. From here it is evident that Joshua taught the Jewish people all of the Torah that he learned from Moses. Now, is it possible to conceive that with every statement that Joshua made while sitting and expounding to the Jewish people the entire Torah, he would diligently say, thus said Moses? Right? When it was clear that Joshua was teaching what he learned from Moses. So he didn't have to say before every single statement that he taught the people that, I learned this from Moses and Moses said. Right? It's implied, it's clear, and everybody knows that Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Yochanan's student. So Rabbi Eliezer, just because he didn't say Rabbi Yochanan's name when he gave over one of Rabbi Yochanan's teachings, it wasn't that he was being disrespectful. It's just that he's always giving over Rabbi Yochanan's teachings, and everybody knows he's giving over Rabbi Yochanan's teachings. Similarly, you, Rabbi Yochanan, you should know that Eliezer, your disciple, is sitting and expounding before his own disciples, and although he does not say so explicitly, everyone knows that it is your Torah. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, who had tried unsuccessfully to appease him, why is it that you do not know how to appease like Ben Edi, our colleague? What they were saying to him wasn't working. It wasn't appeasing him. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that Rabbi Yochanan was so insistent that people say the law in his name? And the Gemara answers, since even King David entreated God with regard to this issue to have mercy on him, as it is stated, Psalm 61:15. I will dwell in your tent forever. I will take refuge in the covert of your wings, Selah. Did David imagine that he would live and endure forever? Rather, this is what David said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe. May I merit that my words will be said in my name in synagogues and study halls, and through this I will attain perpetual life for myself. The Gemara adds that Shimon ben Nazira said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, every Torah scholar from whose mouth people quote a matter of halacha, of law in this world, even after his death, his lips move along with it in the grave. It's a very famous statement of the Talmud that when you give over a teaching that you heard from a Torah scholar, from a tzaddik, and in his name, or you heard it from somebody else who repeated in his name, and then you give it over in the name of the person who taught it, then that person, wherever they're buried, their lips move in the grave. Where is this learned from? Song of Songs 7:10. And your palate is like the best wine, moving gently the lips of those that sleep. Just as with regard to a mass of grapes, once a person places his finger on them, they immediately issue froth as the wine bubbles up and moves around. So too, with regard to the lips of the righteous, when people quote matters of halacha from the mouths of the righteous, their lips move with them in the grave. And the Gemara asks, what pleasure is there for a righteous person when his lips move in the grave? What's so good about that? He's dead. His soul is somewhere else. Shimon bar Nazira said, he derives pleasure like one who drinks spiced wine. Rabbi Yitzchak said, his pleasure is like that of one who drinks aged wine. Even after he drinks it, the taste of the wine remains in his mouth. Similarly, when a Torah scholar's teachings are quoted in his name in this world, his soul in the Garden of Eden, meaning in the world of souls, enjoys the feeling, right? So it's like we're saying that his lips move in the grave, but what we're saying is he's aware that his Torah is being taught in this world in his name, and it gives him pleasure in the world of souls. Rabbi Gidel said, one who quotes a teaching in the name of one who said it should see in his mind's eye the author of the teaching as if he were standing opposite him at that moment. As it is stated, surely man walks as a semblance. Psalms 39:7. When one thinks of another by quoting the Torah he taught, one should actually visualize the image or semblance of that person. You should, in your mind's eye, if you heard it directly from them, imagine them saying it as you are teaching it in their name. Another idea of the lips moving in the grave is that, well, they've left this world, but because their words are still being taught here, it's as if they still have lips in this world. It's like they are given the ability to continue speaking in this world when we give over their teachings in their name. On a related note, the Gemara continues, it is written, most men will proclaim every man his own goodness. Proverbs 26. This is referring to all other people, meaning that most people will quote another person's Torah thoughts without attributing them to the author. However, the verse continues, but a faithful man who can find? That is, who is faithful and accurate in reporting the teachings of others? This is referring to Rabbi Zera, who took great care to maintain the accuracy of the tradition. As Rabbi Zera said, we need not concern ourselves with the traditions of Rav Sheshis, as he is an open-eyed man, a euphemism for a blind person. Since he could not see his master's face while studying with him, it is possible that he did not report his master's words accurately. Right? So according to Rabbi Zera, he only wanted to give over the most accurate version of the teachings of previous sages. And so he wanted to if he was going to teach something that Rabbi Akiva said, he was going to have a direct transmission. Well, so-and-so said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, and there Rabbi Zera wanted somebody who saw Rabbi Akiva deliver those words and who could get the real gist of what Rabbi Akiva said, not just the content, not just the words themselves that could have been written down, but the way Rabbi Akiva said it. You should watch very closely your teachers and people you learn from, because they communicate much more than just the words themselves, the way they deliver it, the emotion, the face, the expression, everything about them. Now, this is not a slight to blind people. Let's learn about Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshes, a prominent third-generation Babylonian Amora, Rav Sheshes was the foremost student of Rav Huna and even though he also served and studied under the rest of the sages of the generation. Rav Sheshes was famous for his unsurpassed expertise in Baraisas, teachings contemporaneous with the Mishnah, and many of the sages of the generation came to learn from him as they knew that his teachings were always based on early sources. In his later years, Rav Sheshes became blind. He remained involved in all aspects of life and was a frequent visitor to the house of the exilarch. He was characterized as extremely forceful and hard as steel, and he did not defer even to eminent world leaders if there was a question of truth and Torah. Rav Sheshes was apparently a garment merchant who earned enough to live comfortably. So, of course, blind people can learn and teach with tremendous effectiveness, but Rabbi Zera is here simply making the point that in addition to the words that you repeat that you've learned from great people, try to capture the way they said it, right? Try to understand everything that was implied, not just the words. The Gemara relates another incident that illustrates Rabbi Zera's concern with the accurate conveyance of tradition. Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Asi, did the rabbi, i.e. Rabbi Asi, know Bar Pitaya that you quote teachings in his name? And Rabbi Asi said to him, I heard them from Rabbi Yochanan, who said them in his name. Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Asi, did the rabbi, meaning Rabbi Asi, know Rav, that you quote teachings in his name? And he said, I heard them from Rabbi Ada bar Ahava, who said them in his name. So I guess it satisfied Rabbi Zera that somebody could give a teaching in the name of Rav, but he wanted to know, did you actually hear that from Rav? He said, no, I heard it from somebody who can be trusted to repeat that teaching exactly. And then he gave the name of the intermediate, Torah scholar who heard it from the original. Having mentioned the verse in which David, and I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in now. Having mentioned the verse in which David expressed a wish that after his death, people would say teachings in his name in this world, the Gemara cites other requests by David. There is no generation without scoffers. In David's generation, what would the ridiculers of his generation do when they heard that David was not permitted to build the temple and only his son Solomon would merit to build it? They would go near David's windows. I mean, imagine this. He's the king. King David always wanted to build a temple. He was able to choose the spot where it would be in Jerusalem. And he was able to make the plans, right, and sort of prepare everything, but he did not merit to build the temple himself. That would be left for his son, King Solomon. And so here we're learning, according to the Talmud, that people would mock King David, that he wanted to build a temple, but he was not going to merit to do it himself. And these scoffers would go near David's windows and say to him, David, David, when will the temple be built? When will we be able to say, let us go to the house of the Lord, as David himself had requested? Now, you would think that a king who's being mocked outside his palace would become so angry, he would say, off with their heads. What was David's reaction? And David would respond with a kind of oath. Even though they intend to anger me, may evil come upon me if I do not rejoice in their words, as I too want the temple to be built soon, even if it means that I must leave this world before my time. As it is written, Psalm 122, verse 1, I rejoiced when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. When David said this, God answered him, when your days are fulfilled and you will sleep with your fathers. That's when the temple will be built. And David thought, well, the sooner the temple is built, the better. So if it means that it can't be built until I'm dead, so maybe I should die a little bit sooner so that the temple will be built sooner. And when David said this, God answered him through the prophet Samuel, when your days are fulfilled and you will sleep with your fathers. This verse indicates that this is what the Holy One, blessed be he, said to David. I reckon full days for you and not deficient days, i.e. I will not deduct any days from your life. Won't Solomon, your son, build a temple only to sacrifice communal offerings? The righteousness and justice that you perform are more pleasant to me than offerings, as it is stated, to perform righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than an offering. Meaning David God said to David, I love you. I love everything that you're doing. I don't want you to leave this world even early, even though it means that the temple will be delayed a little bit since it's already been promised that it won't be built till you're dead. And so that means that all the offerings and all of the mitzvahs that can only be done when the temple was finally built couldn't be done, until David left this world. Nevertheless, David's actions were so beautiful in God's eyes that he wasn't going to limit David's life at all, because David's actions were they were the equivalent of the offerings that would be brought in the temple later. What does God love? He loves the deeds of the righteous. All of us, our righteous deeds are loved by God. Okay. Let's see. Yes, exactly. I read this quote of Julie at the beginning of the show. It's worth saying again. Our thoughts become words. Our words become action. Action become habit. Habits become our character. And our character becomes our destiny. Yosef has a question. From the beginning, before we started the daf, is emunah, faith, considered a character trait to be refined, or is that a spiritual energy, and is it part of the sephiros? And by the way, might I add, as our teacher, I love your enthusiasm, and I never thought I'd be excited to learn Talmud. Thank you so much, Yosef. It's interesting, when we talk about the sephiros, right, so there's 10 sephiros, and they're what they are, they're 3 are intellectual, 7 are emotional, and they correspond, they're sort of attributes in us that correspond to attributes in God. Faith is not one of them, but the 10 sephiros, and they're deeply mystical teachings, and this is the heart of Kabbalah, and it's a whole other course of study in itself. But the 10 sephiros, but the upper 3 are not involved in this daily meditation that we do when we're counting sephiros for 7 weeks. But they actually, can be remembered by the mnemonic Chabad, right? Chochmah, Bina, and Da'as, right? And so it's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And you could think about that as sort of like when you get a flash of an idea that comes to you. That's sort of like Chochmah. That we sometimes translate as wisdom, and Bina, understanding, is when we take that idea, when we finally get a flash, like we get an idea that's like, oh, well, now I see it. But then you have to kind of integrate that knowledge into that until you understand it and you can apply it in your life, and that's Bina. And then Da'as is once it really becomes a part of you, and then you can give it over and teach it and share it, and it's really active in your life. And that's Da'as, knowledge. And those are the upper sephiros. But the ones that we meditate on during this counting of the Omer are Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchus, right? And so just very quickly, like I said, you could spend weeks learning this. But what we do is when we're counting the sephiros for the first week, and right now we're in the first week, and so every day we're thinking about chesed. The whole week is the theme of it is chesed, loving kindness. And then each day we think about a particular aspect of loving kindness, like the loving kindness of loving kindness, the judgment, restraint, the ability to withhold. Sometimes kindness needs to be withheld. Like you can overdo kindness and it becomes quite dangerous. And so the restraint that we have to show so that we don't overdo kindness and throw things out of balance. Tiferet, beauty, harmony, is when we're balancing kindness and judgment, right? Arriving at a good balance of that. And the netzach has to do with like endurance and the idea of doing it every day, and eventually you can sort of come to a victory through that. Hod is the idea of splendor, like when you start to integrate these qualities into yourself, when you really work on yourself and you integrate, and perhaps you're working on, we talked about paro, that everyone has a pharaoh, a personal pharaoh they're trying to break out of. And that's something to think through, this whole kind of prism of these personal attributes in ourselves that emulate God's attributes. And so, if once you start to integrate whatever you're trying to break free of, whatever your pharaoh was that you wanted to break free of this year, you start to become that new person, and there's a splendor to that, right? Like you've risen, you've overcome your impulses that you were previously enslaved to. You were a smoker, you broke free of that. You were too angry, you broke free of that. You were a slave to your lust, or you were a slave to your hunger, you overate. Whatever it was that you were trying to break free of, as you make that break, you become this new person, and there's a splendor to that. And then yesod, foundation. You create a foundation where this is going to last. And then finally, sort of begin and end with Malchus. Malchus is understood the sovereignty of God in our lives. You have to have something sovereign in your life, and it should be God. Because as Bob Dylan says, you got to serve somebody. And if you're not serving the Lord, you're going to end up serving yourself or some passing idea, some value which is not part of eternal values. It seems good now, and when you look back on it a week or a year or a decade later, be like, what was I thinking? Better to serve eternal values. In other words, serve the Lord. So this is just a very, very fast introduction to this idea of counting spheros. So emunah, Yosef, to answer your question, emunah is faith. Emunah means, and it's also related to truth, right? And so the idea emunah is that God is a faithful one. God is a faithful king. That's also, amen and emunah are related. Right? So when you say amen, it means you have faith that God is a faithful king, meaning that this world is built on kindness and justice. And even though sometimes we don't see it immediately, or sometimes we don't even see it in the long run, we have faith that absolutely God is kind and just and sees everything and runs everything. And anything that seems unfair now, eventually, perhaps only when we leave this world, but we'll finally come to understand, that's what God had in mind. And there was a reason for everything, right? And so emunah is that kind of overarching faith that the system works, that the Torah is true, that God loves us and cares about us, and that everything that we espouse as good Torah values are true and are worth pursuing. That's really what emunah is. Okay, that's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 8. Recall that we're a page behind. We got a page ahead last week, but then we didn't have class for 3 days during the holiday. So right now we're 1 page behind. God willing, one day this week where it makes sense, we'll do a double page. Then we'll be caught up again. Then we won't have a class next Saturday night because 7th and 8th day of Passover coincide with Saturday and Sunday of the coming weekend. But whatever, we'll make it up. So for now, we're just 1 day behind the Daf Yomi cycle. That's what I've got for us tonight. Have a great night.